As we made our way towards Bell City, we did what we usually did on these trips. Listen to the radio and play Gun the Target, which is really just a practice game where we shoot at passing broken down cars as a way to pass the time and practice with the guns. But now with the new 50 cals, practice was getting a little bit more heavy-handed, as Barry was currently playing a game with the other shooters in the cars. The first car in the convoy would name what cars were coming up, and each car in the convoy would take turns taking pot shots at it. See who could get the most hits, do the most damage within their short time frame of passing. All while heavy metal music blared in the background, of course. I'm actually surprised this much music from the old world managed to survive into this era. It's kinda tragic, actually. It's been hundreds of years and we're still listening to the same music that they listened to before the Great War started. I haven't heard hide nor hair of any new artists making anything that was actually new. Most bands even played the same old songs. It was like people in the Yellow District refused to move forward, and any new songs you did hear were, sadly, not up to par. I suppose we still have a ways to go, or the people in the Yellow District do, before they reacquire the same level of instrumentalism as they did back in the old days. We were currently listening to some band from back in the old days, of course. A rock band by the name of Metal Knuckles. Were exceptionally popular at the time, or at least that's what the radio broadcaster says, in between songs. I was currently sitting in the back seat, checking over the map and making sure that our position was right and that we were heading in the right direction. By the looks of it, we were. We were about to head into the outskirts of the original Bell City. The original Bell City was a fairly large city, in which a lot of people used to live. However, since the Great War of the past, the original inhabitants have all since been, well, reduced to smoking piles of ashes. The new Bell City is actually somewhat of a scavenging station, or that's how it originally started. And people gathered up around the outskirts of the original Bell City, making small encampments, in order to spend their days scavenging what remained inside. And after a while, all of these scavengers started grouping up, trading goods, finding a steady source of water and resource outside the city, and eventually formed a new city just on the outskirts. Our current trajectory would take us directly through the ruins of Old Bell City, which was the most direct route for taking us to Bell City New, and in its proper place, which would most likely mean lots of target practice for Barry and the other gunmen. At this point, it was about noon, as we were starting to cross into Old Bell City. The skyscrapers weren't exactly as tall as they were for the ones outside of the ruins in the East District. In the old world, that was the larger of the two cities. It was referred to New Star, which was the second largest city next to Newgate City, which held the standard for being the largest and most powerful city in this side of the country, where it was basically the center of all commerce, at least the biggest part of it. But Bell City was nothing to scoff at. I assume in its day it was still very respectable in status and money. These old worn-out skyscrapers that still stood hundreds of years later were more than proof of that. Barry was actually hanging off of the 50 cal, singing along with the Metal Knuckles record. As he stood there, one arm dangling off of the gun, the other pretending he had a mic in his hand and singing in my direction, starting to wave at me, trying to get me to sing along with him. "Come on, Jax!" he shouted over the rumble of the engine and the air passing by. "I need a backup singer, man! Or at least shred those guitar licks for me. Your lead guitar, I can't do this without you, man," he said laughingly. A big grin plastered on his face, as always, as we made our way by yet another one of the skyscrapers in Bell City, as a massive explosion erupted in front of us, sending fire, metal, and debris in all directions. The first car in the convoy had been completely blown away. The other cars, including our own, began to swerve around, trying to avoid the wreckage and destruction. Everyone beginning to panic, wondering what's going on, as an air carrier swept past, hovering overhead, and machine guns began to blare out of it. "Guns up!" Barry shouted as he manned his 50 cal machine gun and started unleashing rounds at it. It wasn't long before the other two vehicles followed suit, everyone opening fire in the direction of the air carrier. My day went from calm and peaceful to a complete and utter panic. 0 to 60 in 5 seconds flat. My heart was pounding as I reached into the floorboard to grab the energy weapon that I had been carrying around, sticking it out of the top of the open vehicle and beginning to fire on the air carrier myself, before seeing other vehicles start to show up. By the looks of it, 3 of them coming around corners. I don't know what compels me in these types of situations, but as it all broke out, my mind automatically rushes to weaponry, theirs and ours. The explosion that took out the first car in the convoy, that came from the air carrier. Its primary weapon system is an impulse shockwave cannon. It fires a high-density energy pulse. It's heavy duty. It takes up a lot of power, but you can only shoot it once before having an exaggerated wait time before you can fire it again. So they weren't going to be able to fire it anytime soon. The air carrier was armored, but that armor isn't impenetrable. The 50 cals can tear through it, given enough time. But, being that it's an airborne target, it of course wasn't making it easy. But now these other vehicles were entering the mix. And to boot, they outnumbered us, having taken out the lead car. I turned my gun in the direction of the new vehicles entering the fray, hoping that the 50 cals can handle keeping that air carrier at bay. I started firing on these new drivers. My weapon is a pulse rifle, firing a long-range density energy projectile. It's extremely effective against people or armor plating, regardless, but it's not an automatic. It has a 1 shot per second fire rate, maximum, high penetration, low yield. The weapons that the other people in our group were equipped with were mainly automatic rifles. The vehicles on our tails were armored, so their weapons wouldn't be much use. They do their damage, of course, but unless they get a very good shot, the people inside of the vehicles are too heavily protected. My weapon is the only one that stands a chance at breaking through, with a few well-placed shots. The 50 cals would be perfect for it. High damage, high output. A few of them aimed at these cars would make them disappear in no time at all. But if they take their attention off the air carrier, then we've got nothing keeping it and its dual 20 caliber machine guns off of us. And that's not to speak of the main cannon, which doesn't have a high rate of fire by any standard. but will eventually recharge. By the looks of it, the only advantage we seem to have is that they don't have 50 cal guns on those vehicles of theirs. It seems to be gunners sticking their heads out of rooftop exits or windows. The gunfire was flying by wildly. The primary problem was that air carrier, so that's where the 50 cals needed to stay. At least 2 of them, but we needed to switch our game. One of the 50 cals had to focus on these cars. Trying to not go into a complete and utter panic, I shouted the orders out to Barry, told him to make sure that the other 2 stayed on the carrier, and asked him to gun for the other cars. One thing's definitely for sure. This day just went very, very badly.